All right. Good morning. Good morning. Unfortunately, the Jenny White is out today. So we wish her the best, and she'll be back with us on Friday, I'm sure. But we're going to have a great show with Dr. Robert Mather, the conservative social psychologist. And here, I think he's had a recent experience that I want to talk about. And then also we're going to talk about just some of his findings and studies that he's done just throughout his career, and one of which is kind of the taboo subject of MK Ultra. Anyway, I'm going to bring on Dr. Mather here. Sir, good morning.
Good morning, Michael. I'm sorry that Jenny couldn't be here.
Yeah, me too. Well, she'll be back. I know everybody will miss her. She is the Jenny White. I have to always call her out every morning when we get started. Call out Jenny White. But how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Yeah. Well, real quick, what is kind of you brand yourself as the conservative social psychologist. What is a social psychologist per se?
So I'm not the kind of psychologist that helps people. It's kind of the first thing I usually say. I'm a scientist, and so I work in a research laboratory. We do surveys. We do electrophysiological research on people where we look at brain waves. Mostly, I'm studying attitudes and persuasion, and I'm studying stereotypes and discrimination, and different applications of that, maybe in business or in forensic science situations. But I'm trained as an experimental psychologist, and so we're trained to do research rather than clinical or counseling or helping people, and that gives me a little bit different perspective sometimes on the field as a whole, and sometimes more objective.
Yeah, because I think most people just feel that the field itself is literally just people going in and counseling with someone for the most part, but I guess there is an entire there's an entire aspect of just the mental control, and that's what we're going to kind of get into, is that mental control itself, just in overall practice, whether it's business or government in one way or another.
Sure, there's a whole science of human behavior and perception that supports the science of psychology, and clinical and counseling are some kind of applied offshoots of that. But you've got to have people that understand how air traffic controllers process information so the planes don't crash into each other, and how you can stress pilots and have them still perform and things like that. So there's a wide range within experimental psychology that forms the science of psychology.
Yeah. Well, I want to, speaking on psychology, I want to just bring this up really quick. I know I was kind of telling you about this, but here just on December 2nd, so what was that, Monday, the oversight committee for, the Government Committee on Oversight and Accountability released their 2-year-long COVID report. And I want to just hit one or two things in this and just kind of get your reaction. But anyway, this is a 500-page report. This link here is just, and I need to make this just a little bit bigger so everybody can see it. So this is just a link to the website, and you can download the 500-page report here. But a couple of things I wanted to hit was, first of all, they address the origin of COVID, which they basically say this was a man-made biological gain-of-function virus. It was not just, something in the raw, just out in nature that happened. And they implicate EcoHealth Alliance here with Dr. Peter Daszak. I want to go down to, so they talk a lot about the funding there and the amount of money. I mean, there's billions and billions and billions of waste and fraud that happened in that. They talk about the WHO here, but in the side of it, and I literally call COVID, what it was obedience training, in my opinion. That's what I call COVID, was just an experience in obedience training. But anyway, right here, they talk about the social distancing, 6 feet apart, which shut down schools and small businesses across the country, was arbitrary and not based on science. And even Fauci, in a closed door session, said that it just sort of appeared that the social distancing just sort of appeared. And then they talked about the mask mandates. There was no evidence that they had any kind of efficacy. There's no scientific data. The lockdowns, they talked about the lockdowns here causing harm, especially the effect on younger children, rather than prioritizing government. Let me go down. There's another one I want you to see here. Okay, so they're talking about the vaccine. So you guys can go back. You can just Google the government oversight COVID. Okay, so they talk about school closures here, and that the science never justified prolonged school closures, and that kids were never, likely to spread the virus. Then there's another one here. This one is semi-important. I want to get your thoughts on this one. So they're talking about the AFT, which is basically like a teachers union, and they're not a scientific agency, but yet they had a direct line to the CDC, and they were actually, part of the school process, making decisions on how these schools are going to run in one way or another. And the president here the president of the AFT revealed that they had a direct line to the CDC director Walensky. So I just want to get your thoughts on a couple of those things there from the social psychologist point of view.
We'll work backwards on that, and I'll try to remember all the things I was thinking. But that last part indicates there was a loop, right? So the teachers, the schools that were shutting down were all saying this is because of the CDC recommendations. They put it back on them, but they were in the ear of the CDC, right? So that doesn't mean that the CDC was this objective party that was only looking at the science leading to those decisions. It sounds like there was a loop there that was kind of hidden from everybody. The obedience part you're talking about, and it did seem like a giant game of Simon Says, right? Where there was tremendous tests for obedience to see if people will follow these arbitrary rules. Whether that was intentional or not is up to debate, but that's what it turned into. One of the large components, I think, of how all that played out was the normative conformity. So, normative conformity is something where people will conform to a group because they want to be accepted by the group, and they're pressured from the group by groups. Typically will tease and mock and do those types of things to get people to comply initially. And that's really what we saw with the normative conformity of people, where you were seeing, Hollywood actors, and you were seeing, everybody in the public marketplace of ideas was being mocked if they said any of the things you listed off that turned out to be true. And it was just a big game of compliance.
Yeah. Well, I want to hit that. So anyone, I would just encourage anyone to go look that up, and you can just read through that summary and look. But I know one part of there that I did look up is they did say that those lockdowns and the school practices, not just the lockdowns, but the social distancing, the masking, it did cause irreparable harm. And they use that term in that it caused irreparable harm. And that goes back to our lawsuit with EPS, where we proved, this was 2.5 years ago, we proved that it caused irreparable harm to those kids. And the district court judge agreed with us, and the Oklahoma Supreme Court ultimately. So it's not like things did not happen because of those scenarios that they put in, or those policies they put in place.
What's interesting is that I've seen from people in lower ed and higher ed, I know obviously a lot of teachers all the way across the board at all levels, and they're all dealing now with the same problems, which it's become evident to even the most militant of social distancing, masking, closing everything down, people that I've known. It's become obvious to all of them that this created, incredible damage to the students, because at all levels, everybody's having to deal with this and what happened to them in the levels before. So it's something that's seems to be widely acknowledged, at least privately, by, I would say, maybe 80% of teachers that I encounter, which are of all varieties of political persuasion.
Yeah. And they do they do agree that, yes, it did cause harm.
Yes.
Do they actually say that?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, good for them.
And so many of them are parents too. Like, in addition to being, everybody can see it now, I think. And that's probably one of the reasons why Donald Trump got elected, right? is so many people were able to see like that was a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I hope we had a lot of lessons learned through that, and I hope people just don't automatically comply just because. And that really goes into that socialism side of everything, and we can hit on that in a little bit. But I want to specifically get going on what you were invited to do because of your actual expertise in psychology from the conservative social side and your scientific background. So you were invited to speak at was it a conference?
No, this was just I was just an invited speaker to this university.
Okay.
It was just me. It wasn't part of a series of events or anything. I was just invited to talk to them.
Okay. But did they bring you there specifically because of your side of
yes.
Of the right left conversation?
Yeah. So the way this got set up originally, so I'd actually spoken to this university before, and it's always done remotely. So we do it as a Zoom, just kind of like we're doing here, a Zoom or a remote type of thing. And so it's a university in Seattle, Washington. They've got a PsyD program, which is a doctorate of psychology, and so that's a clinical type of degree. They have the only APA accredited, which is American Psychological Association, the only APA accredited social justice program in their PsyD program. Extremely activist, liberal campus, liberal department. And so they brought me in actually before. They brought me in several years ago to speak to them. And they do this as a way to try to get, kind of more diversity for their students, for them.
Well, and I would think you would want from the psychology, whether you're, like a clinical psychologist working with people, trying to counsel, or more so from the scientific side, like you are, you want to be able to process all of the information kind of on a non-bias level and then come to your conclusions from there. But I guess we can't say that the left does not dominate psychology, especially and academia in one way or another. But I guess it's just so I'd put your article up here, but I can't log in there. But tell everybody where we can find your article if they want to go read it in depth.
So that article is on. It was just basically a blog post. I put that one out on Locals on the my Patriot Brain community on Locals. That's one that I have there's a paywall behind that. So sometimes I can put things behind there that won't get me in trouble in other ways.
Yeah.
And I've got my podcast, I've got blogs, I've got all kinds of places to disseminate information, but I tend to put the stuff that maybe might get me in trouble somewhere or cause unnecessary controversy that I don't want to deal with behind there. And so that one, that article, I think you have to have an account for that one, but I don't think you have to be behind the paywall to actually get that article. It was briefly behind there, but it shouldn't be now. Okay.
Well, sorry to interrupt. So let's go back. You're invited to the highly leftist dominated Seattle University.
So I'm invited by a faculty member who had run across my research before and directs their speaker program. And that faculty member had, I was invited in 2021, I guess, is when I spoke there before. Same situation, but it wasn't an election year. And I'd spoke there and I presented the different research I've done on the, large discrepancies between conservatives and liberals in social psychology and in psychology in general and in clinical psychology, and how this impacts the treatment that conservatives get, and how, liberal activism in the field pushes conservatives away from getting mental health treatment that they need. All the stuff that I did that in 2021. Talk went great. They were extremely respectful. They asked me good questions. Some of them stayed in contact with me. Like, that went great. So when I was invited to give 2 talks this year, I thought, hey, I enjoyed my time with their students and faculty last time, so I'm looking forward to it. And so I gave 2 talks in back-to-back weeks, and it was right before the election. And the first one I thought went pretty well. They were respectful. They listened to me. There was one student, I think, that maybe gave a statement rather than a question, but it was within the realm of something that I'm used to dealing with. It wasn't a problem. I walked away feeling pretty good about it. And then I did hear from the speaker inviter after that, and she let me know, like, hey, there's been some problems while you were gone. Like, they got the administration involved, and they want you to not be allowed to come to the second one. Everybody's really worked up over all your hateful rhetoric. And so I added a few things to my next slide that just said, look, I'm not trying to convert you to be a conservative. I'm not trying to do this. I'm just trying to let you know that, conservatives that need mental health don't feel welcome by you. And so here, you can hear kind of our side of the story. Anyway, so they were it was basically set up to attack me the entire time. So I really didn't talk much after my presentation. It was about 45 minutes of them with their pre-written responses that were, just all designed to try to take me down. It was mostly faculty. The students just listened to the faculty try to, talk about how my hateful rhetoric and, basic conservatives don't deserve mental health treatment because they don't, because they chose to be conservatives, and that's evil. I mean, these are literally things they're saying. And at one point I said, so do you think that these conservatives that you say should feel welcome in your counseling, do you think if they listen to how you're talking to me right now that they would feel like they were welcome, or do you think they would be less likely to come to you now, even more so than before? The reason I got put in this position originally was because, my Psychology Today blog, the Conservative Social Psychologist, there are very few conservatives in my field. And so I've been very public and outspoken about that. And so that also means that clinical and counseling patrons or clients, people that are seeking clinical and counseling mental health treatment, they contact me a lot, and they'll say, I had these bad experiences. Can you recommend somebody? I can't find any conservatives. And so because of that, and because of some of the articles that I've written, there are now other places that have these kind of consortiums of conservatives. There are chat groups and social media groups. There are websites that people can go to find conservative therapists that have identified themselves that way. And there's this whole industry of that. And one of the things I thought was funny was one of the faculty members saying, I don't understand why you're even talking to us. I can Google on here and I can find all these different websites for conservative psychologists. So it's not an issue. And I refrain myself from saying, I'm the reason all of those are there. The only reason I can tell you what they all are. And I'm there. And every one of them has thanked me for inspiring them to do that, because I stood up to this mob, and I've been doing that for a decade. But anyway, I left there thinking, okay, so this is the worst of the worst, but this is still not what I see here in Oklahoma. I was like, okay, so the progressives in Seattle are way different than the progressives here in Oklahoma.
Well, on that fact, I mean, you said it was the faculty attacking you more so than the student body, but so you were there 2 years before, correct?
Yeah, 2021. So that's maybe 3
years. 3 years before. So did the faculty just kind of get radicalized in that time, more radicalized? Or, I mean, I can't see just having a complete turnover and all new people, but maybe that was the case.
Well, I think there's two parts of it, right? I think the faculty didn't go to the last one. And there were other faculty there that had been invited from other universities that the inviter had invited in. And those people were all there and also contacted me and said, hey, we're really sorry that we really value what you're doing. And that did not come through with what those people were talking about. But I don't think the faculty changed. I think they probably didn't really go to the first one or didn't have time to think about a response. And then when we did this one 3 years later, it's right by an election. Everybody's fired up. They heard from their students like, hey, this conservative was here. And so they came in and felt like they needed to protect the students from all the evil rhetoric. That's what they kept saying I had, this hateful, divisive, evil rhetoric.
Yeah.
So,
well, that was, I wish I could put your article up and just put some of those bullet points to some of the things that you said, like you said, you were just there to help them understand the challenges that your conservative clients may face.
Yeah.
Or you're going to just help them understand the challenges of conservatives, that would be their clients, trying to just seek some treatment, or just the broader view of the pitfalls of that they may face as a practitioner. I mean, how can that be so divisive or so hateful? I mean, how does that even connect?
So here, I just pulled it up since you mentioned that. I'm going to read this was on my PowerPoint in the beginning. I said, today's goals, what they are, to help you understand the challenges that your conservative clients may face, to help you understand the challenges of conservative would-be clients who don't seek treatment, to help you take a broader view at political related pitfalls that you may face as a practitioner. And then I have another slide, what they are not. So what my goals are not: to make you a conservative, to make you abandon your current ideology, to tell you that your ideology or religious beliefs are incorrect, to scold you, or to make you apologize for any of your ideological activism.
Wow.
So I was pretty clear about like, hey, I'm just telling you what it's like over here.
Wow. I mean, but it was just from the get. I mean, just how long were you speaking? Were they interrupting you, or was it just like, or did they let you talk and then Q&A, or like how did it actually happen?
They let me talk, and then so I talked for about maybe 30, 40 minutes. PowerPoint, data, right? Like all the things that I'm a scientist, so I was showing them the science. And then, the first faculty member chimed in for the question and answers. There were no questions. Most of them, they were all statements. And then after about 45 minutes of this, they started yelling at me because they said, "You're not listening to us." I'm like, "I'm not even talking. I said, you all are doing all the talking. I'm just sitting here. Like, how am I not listening to you?" And then I realized listening to them means like I should have interjected and said, "You all are completely right. I'm completely wrong." Right? The only way that you can demonstrate you're listening to them is to just, concede everything and take their viewpoint.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to ask is from their point of, from your point of view, is there the possibility of an open-minded conversation? Not with all of them, but just with the radical ones, is there a possibility of like an actual open-minded debate, or is it just they're so entrenched in their ideology that they don't even have a chance?
There's no chance with the ones that are extremely radical. I've decided that, and I'm a pretty optimistic guy. Like I'm not a guy that loses faith on people very often. But that's, again, not all progressives, right? You're down there on the far end of that, where they're entrenched in their attitudes, and everything I know about attitudes and persuasion and attitude certainty would have told me that they're not going to change their mind. But I wasn't even there to change their mind. I just thought maybe they could double their clientele, right? But they could make more money and double their clientele by just being nice to the conservatives.
Well, that's kind of, as you go down so you're kind of at the highest level in academia per se, talking to, these people that are, faculty and their students. I mean, I wouldn't say that there's maybe there might be another one step up level there, but as we go down the path, so you've got these radicalized people in these universities teaching kids that are ultimately going to be teaching our kids at some point in school, or as school counselors or whatever. We'll just say we'll go the school counselor route. So, I mean, we've seen the explosion of DEI and all these things in schools, and like from the American School Counselor Association, from what you saw, how do you see that, coming forward with what's already in schools with these counselors, even here in Oklahoma, like our local schools with their counselors and kind of that ideology playing out there?
I think it's pretty standard now across the country in a lot of programs. There are programs. I don't want to get into discussions of specific programs because I'm involved in some of them, but there are programs that are highly scientific in their approach to school counseling. And so there are some programs that really don't buy into all of that. And it's not because maybe the faculty or the people that run it don't believe it, but it's because they've got a very rigid scientific curriculum as to how they teach these things. And so those types of programs that are, BCBA certified and those things are different than some of the other school counseling programs and those others that are going to go all in on the DEI stuff and make it into an indoctrination platform. So again, it kind of goes with anything you look at. You want to look at, the credentials and the background of whoever it is you're working with, or whoever is teaching your kids.
Yeah. And I think Jenny and I talked about it quite a bit. We see, there may be, let's say in Oklahoma, I mean, we're fairly conservative here. We're basically, it looks like we're red. So we'll just say, we are, we'll just say it. But for the most part, we're not California, we're not Seattle, we're not these West Coast places, but our teachers, they go to these national conferences where you have these counselors, where you have these people at these higher levels with this major ideology. And we've seen just over time, some of these, a lot of these counselors, they may enter into an Oklahoma school with good intentions, good thoughts, maybe they're well-grounded, but over a series of time, they become radicalized in one way or another through these associations at national level.
Well, think about it. Think about whether you're a baseball coach in a high school, or you're a school counselor, or you're any type of professional that is working at a local level, and then you go to these conferences, and that's where it sets the standard for the type of experiences you're supposed to be providing and the types of skills you're supposed to be developing. And so anytime that the left can capture those professional organizations, and they've made a pretty major move in persuading the world, and especially if they can do that with education and mental health and those types of things. Alinsky tactics are specifically about trying to control the mind, right? And control the minds of people. And those are pretty good ways to do it. Education and mental health.
Well, since you mentioned Alinsky, I want to bring up a predecessor of Alinsky here. I don't know if you've read this. This, to me, Edward Bernays' book Propaganda is like the literal backbone of kind of what we're going to talk about next, and just the overall controlling programming aspect of a lot of these programs that are instilled kind of at the government level and funded at the government level. But I want to get into, you've done multiple podcasts, and I just want to give a disclaimer here before we start talking about this. What you're going to say is literally 100% backed by government documents in one way or another about government funded academia scientists performing all kinds of crazy scientific experiments and all kinds of things that before today's time, this was completely taboo. You were just completely crazy if you even mentioned something like MK Ultra. But you've done deep dives into MK Ultra, into the programs, into the scientists and the funding, into people like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who was a product of that. And I think it's crazy that even in today's time, with the amount of documentation that's come out, that they've allowed to come out, I should say, allowed, that they didn't destroy. So with the amount of documentation that is available, there's still people that think you're crazy if you say that MK Ultra even existed, or this or that. I mean, it's so crazy to think about how those things, because in my opinion, this is my opinion now, not yours, Doc. I'm not speaking for you or Jenny or Rope, but most of the terrorism, in my opinion, that we experience is funded by the government in one way or another. Now, that's just my opinion. You don't have to agree. We can disagree either way. I don't think it's just all coincidence this stuff happens. And I think just your documentation through MK Ultra all the way back to the 40s, through all these programs, and I think people are in for just a mind-blowing, next 20, 30 minutes of the history of this and what you've actually uncovered. So I'll let you just kind of get rolling, and I'll just interject as I need to say something. Well,
let me tell you how because I guess we have time, right? So I'll tell the story of how this all started. So it was one of my podcast listeners contacted me, I don't know, 2020, 2019, maybe around there. And they said, hey, you ought to check out Alex Jones's podcast on episode where he's on Joe Rogan. And so I said, all right, well, first of all, I don't listen to Joe Rogan because that was like a 3-hour podcast. I mean, I don't have time to do that. It took me like a month to get through the whole thing. But it was very good. I wasn't familiar with Alex Jones yet. There was all kinds of crazy stuff in there. And at some point it was a flippant thing. He talked about the CIA's MK Ultra program that used to do these horrible things to people. I mean, it was probably 2 or 3 sentences. And then he moved on. Horrible psychological experiments to people. I'm like, whatever. I've never heard of this. And I've got a PhD in psychology, psychology professor. I'm an editor of a journal. I know all this stuff about psychology.
Yeah. I should know this. I should know this. If this is happening, I should know this.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, here's my chance to debunk whatever this Alex Jones guy is saying, which, by the way, Alex Jones is right about some things. But so I'm like, here's my chance to debunk this guy, because this is right in my wheelhouse with psychology. And so I start digging into it. And first of all, it's like, there's nothing out there for a while. I'm digging around. I don't see anything reputable other than like, Reddit threads where people are like MK Ultra. I'm like, okay, so there's not a real thing.
Yeah. And this was still, let's just reset that. This was still like 2019, just 2018, 2019.
Yeah. 2019, 2020 around there, probably within a year of whenever I published that Psychology Today article. So eventually I find something. And I find I find some legitimate information on it. I start digging a little bit deeper and digging into the government documents. So I'll get back to this, the timeline of this in a minute. But the MK Ultra program was a CIA run program, and it went from 54 to 63, or 53 to 64, I think is what it went to. And so in 1974, there was a Senate hearing investigating it. And that's where the documents came from, the testimony of people that came before the Senate in that hearing. And so I started looking at those. And what was fascinating was it was hard to do because the links would change. They would just, the government is forced to publish those documents and links to them, but they're not.
The government links to that Senate select hearing. Yeah. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So at the time, those would move around on me. And so I'd have to dig it up and find it again. I would leave it, I would copy the link and then I would go back to it to try to read more of it. And pretty soon I found, hey, they're changing the links on these things so people can't get to them easily. And this was around the time of, this was probably around 2020. So this was the height of shadow banning in all forms online. They don't seem to do it now as much. I don't notice it. So anyway, I looked into that program. I wrote an article for Psychology Today about it, put a lot of research into that one. And talked about a lot of things that I don't think any of my colleagues had ever heard of. And it was an extremely popular article. It was widely read. It was all over the place. It also led to a lot of really crazy people contacting me consistently for a long, long time. Everybody thinks that they've been in some government psychological experiment to the point where I don't even read or correspond with people who do that, because I know that for every 100 people that contact me about that, maybe one of them is real and the rest of them are crazy. And so I don't have time to wade through that or sort through that stuff. But anyway, so back to the programs. So before you get to the MK Ultra, you got to go back to the 1940s, 1950s. And so in the 40s and 50s, the United States government believed that the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union had developed essentially truth serums that they could use for interrogation. Yeah. And so the government wanted to test that and figure out ways that they could enhance interrogations. And so they started with what was called Project Artichoke. And that's the next thing I'm going to dig into that I haven't got around to yet. But it was the CIA. It was called Project Artichoke. That's the official government name of the project. And so Project Artichoke looked at using sodium pentothal and hypnosis to try to enhance interrogations and get people to, give up information they have. So to do that, that means you're injecting people with drugs. That means you're hypnotizing people. You're trying to do this to, who is it going to be, right? Is it going to be
probably against their will, without informed consent in one way or another. And, who are these people that they're doing this experiment to?
Yep. And this was long before informed consent was even a thing.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't dug into that program yet. So that was the predecessor to it. So in 1953 to 1964, there was the MK Ultra program. And that's the
and let me interrupt you just 1 second. I want to just make a point here. So, 2 points. First of all, I guess I want to just kind of reset the background of this MK Ultra, because one of the things that you talked about in your podcast was the only reason why we even know about this is because like 90% of the documents were destroyed. Mm-hmm. In what? So we're only talking about 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% that actually came to light through part of that Senate select hearing or whatever it was, and the documentation that was provided there. But also I would just want to make the point of, remember the Nuremberg trials, remember all the Nazi experiments, remember how bad this is all government sponsored against people. They're doing this stuff. And to say that, I'm not going to say this was condoned by the American people in any way. These are bad scientists that were part of the government in one way or another, being funded by the government here in the United States, doing this stuff at the same time that the Nazis were doing what they were doing. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
So MK Ultra 1953 to 64 was under the operation of Alan Dulles, was the CIA director that authorized this and oversaw this at the director level. Dulles Airport in DC, right? Like he got an airport named after him for this kind of stuff.
Yeah. But we don't even want to go down the rabbit trails with Dulles and Kennedy, but go ahead.
Right. Whole different podcast. Yeah. So there were a lot of things they were doing with MK Ultra with behavior modification, but some of the highlights were, giving LSD to people, hypnosis, all with the idea of how they can use that in the field for clandestine operations. They had 162 CIA-backed projects that are documented, right? That, like you said, after the program was shut down, and I guess about 9 years later, in 1973, I think Richard Helms was the director, and he ordered all the documents to be destroyed. So they destroyed. They thought they had destroyed all of the documents related to that 11-year MK Ultra project. It was in advance of the Senate Church Committee hearings. Frank Church was the director of the committee, so it's called the Church Committee. So it was in advance of that, but then they found some of the documents hadn't been destroyed, and that's what makes the record up in those church hearings, like you said, are a very small part of this. But 162 different CIA-backed projects, which means that they're paying researchers to do work on their behalf. 80 different institutions, which means mostly universities. 185 researchers. That's what the MK Ultra, the documented part of it, covered. They did studies on, they used drug-addicted prisoners, probably against their will. They administered LSD to over 1,100 soldiers in the United States Army, probably against their will. So Sidney Gottlieb was a chemist at the CIA, and he's the one who was the scientific director of the MK Ultra program that whole time. It was black money that was, funneling in to cover all this behavior modification research and do all the things that they really didn't want the general scientific community asking questions about, because the general scientific community would have said all of these are unethical. But they used some very high profile scientists from the general scientific community, right? They're doing this research at universities and other places like that.
Large, brand name universities like Harvard, places like that.
Yeah, like Harvard and closer to home, Texas Christian University, OU Medical Center.
Yeah, here. OU Medical with what was the guy? What was the Lewis
West?
Yeah,
at OU Medical Center, and then Muzafer Sheriff, who did the famous Robbers Cave study. He was at the University of Oklahoma, and he participated in a CIA-funded conference with Saul Sells at Texas Christian University, which had to be held around here somewhere. If you got TCU, OU Medical Center, all those things together. And it led me to wonder, and I haven't dug into this yet, it led me to wonder if the Robbers Cave study or studies, because there were several unpublished versions of that don't get discussed, if those were all CIA-funded projects. It's a famous social psychological study done with children in Oklahoma City that were taken to Robbers Cave State Park and forced into groups that kind of competed and fought with each other. Led me to wonder if that was an MK Ultra project. Nobody knows about this in my field. People don't talk about it. They don't discuss it. They don't even know to ask these questions. So it's not like everybody in my field just willfully ignores this. They've never heard of it because it's been erased. It's hard to find. You can't find any mention of any of these things in any psychology textbook. I'd never seen it until I started digging in on my own. And so there's a possibility that I'll write my next book about this, because I do feel like it's an important piece of the puzzle of psychology that no one ever talks about or even knows about.
If they're actively destroying documents,
it makes it hard.
And what did anything ever happen to Helm destroying those documents? Or
I don't think so.
Just got a free pass, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, we tend to do that when people destroy documents at the government level. They just, oh well, we just didn't catch it in time. But so Ewan Cameron was getting funded, I believe it was through the MK Ultra program, and he was at a Canadian university. And so what he did was he was seeing clients from the public who were coming to him with major depression, is what it would have been called at the time. And so they're going to him for help. And what he did was just awful. He did electric neurostimulation, where he would just blast them with electricity in their brains, sometimes for days on end.
Wow.
He would put them in drug-induced comas for weeks at a time. And he was researching how to erase memories. That's why he was getting MK Ultra funding, was to how to erase memories. They wanted to see if they could go in and blast, I would assume, field operatives or somebody that had information for us, because why would you want to erase the memories of somebody on the other side? But anyway, so he actually, I think it was around 80 of his former clients that won I think 77 of them won lawsuits, and then maybe 4 of them settled out of court, but in Canadian court. So all of this was exposed in court documents over there, all of those abuses that he had. And these were people that came seeking treatment. He said, I can help you. And then he did these awful things to them while being funded by another government.
And what's the, like, if you were just a person in private sector, what would be the oversight, or what would happen to you if you were doing something like that? I mean, you'd probably go to prison. I mean, what would happen?
Well, so as far as researchers goes, we have to pass our research through institutional review boards that oversee ethics. And I was the chair of ours at our institution for a long time. And so that's the important oversight part of it, wherever you're at. If you're in the private sector and you're going to do, clinical drug research, or you're going to do, any research that's going to be published in an academic journal, you have to do that too. But like for my company that I have a behavioral science analytics company. And I realized very quickly, like, hey, I can do my own research without any oversight. I have to go through an IRB. I'm legally liable for it. Like if there's a problem with it, somebody can sue me. But those for me are just surveys and things, small things like that. I'm not strapping people up and electrocuting them. So those are very minimal risk things, and I'm not publishing them, or else I would have to demonstrate that I'd gone through an IRB. So if you're a private company that's not going to publish anything anywhere, and the government wants to fund you for those things, as long as nobody sues you, there'd be no oversight or accountability.
Wow. So I guess how can they legally allocate money to that without having like an actual oversight component to that?
Well, they can't. They have to have multiple layers of security clearance, clandestine type operations to fund that and do that.
Wow.
And that, of course, again, this was done a while back. I don't want to speculate on what might be going on now, but
yeah, I was going to say we probably can't even imagine what's going on now.
They did research with electromagnetic pulses, trying to disrupt people's brain waves and cause what they called a brain concussion. You've got to have participants for that, right? Somebody doesn't just sign up for that. You probably got soldiers. They did that very typically. They used prisoners and soldiers, which is why there's so much about consent. What came out of this was really the institutional review board for academic purposes. So all of those people that were working at universities could never do this now, even through that dark money funnel. They couldn't do that. They wouldn't be allowed to.
Like these type of physical experiments with people. There's no way at the university level you could conduct experiments like this.
No, like the examples I gave of sheriff. Well, sheriff's research wasn't abusive in any way, but the examples we gave of people in these different, like the Louis West at OU Medical Center, which is OU Health Science Center now. So he was doing research on hypnosis and I think hallucinogens he was giving people. He wouldn't be able to do that in the same way because he is affiliated with the university. So even no matter where the funding source comes from, he's accountable to the oversight that comes with that. So that's all changed since 1974 when the federal government released their Belmont report. So it does tie up a lot of loose ends in the way that it was conducted there, but there's still ways they could do it.
Yeah. Wow.
Here's one of my favorites. So they wanted to have field applications of these things, right? They didn't want to just figure out if you can erase people's memories or if you can make people more susceptible to telling the truth. They wanted to know if those things could work in the field for spy type things. And so they had CIA agents hire prostitutes to slip LSD into people's drinks, just regular people out at regular bars. They did this in San Francisco. And then they brought them back to a safe house where they had a two-way mirror and they could observe what happened after that. They did this to in 1953. They did this to Dr. Frank Olson, who was working for the CIA, and they gave him LSD to see if they could get him to give up his secrets. And then he died under mysterious circumstances. And they don't know if it was because he'd just blown the whistle on the project or if it was because he just accidentally died when they did this to him. But he fell out of a window. Whether he jumped on his own or was pushed is all up to debate.
Wow. Well, touch on real quick also that whole, I found it pretty interesting in your podcast on that, that whole connection with Missouri and those documents in the basement there that you had a friend actually look at or found them or something.
Yeah, I had a friend who was listening to my podcast and had contacted me at one point. And he said, I was in the basement archives of the University of Missouri at one point, and I ran across these documents, and it was really weird. They were kind of hidden away, and I found them, and they weren't even, I don't think they were even cataloged. He was busy cataloging stuff, and those were like, don't catalog these. Well, think about it. If you're required to keep documents, you don't have to make them readily available to people. So we'll stick them in the basement. We won't put them in the catalog. No one can find them unless somebody really wants to go look for them, which maybe I'll do at some point. But this was the Missouri, let's see, what was it called? The Missouri Institute of Psychiatry. And it was, it was affiliated with the Air Force for all these studies they used. And they gave LSD to, I guess, how many soldiers? This was done in 1969 to 1970. So a couple years. Hypnosis, LSD, all these different things they did to test pilots. And it was really pretty incredible that they did lobotomies on schizophrenics, lobotomized schizophrenics LSD to see what would happen to what they can remember, things like that. Anyway, it was pretty intense.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I want to just get your thoughts on this, on a couple of these comments from Earl's daughter. It says, in 2021, after losing my job, I applied for Sooner Care to seek therapy for my teenage daughters to deal with the COVID-19 madness. The therapist convinced my daughters they had sexual ID problems. I mean, how I know you're not on that side, but how does, and we did the podcast with,
you did a fantastic podcast on that.
And then fortunately the sessions were on Zoom. So I just happened to hear what the therapist was saying. God only knows how much damage she would have caused if the therapist was in office and out of my sight. Yeah. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, you really want to know especially if you're talking about your children, right? You really want to know who has the ability to influence them. You don't want to just hand over control to anybody. And I think that's a lesson we know as parents, but sometimes we try to trust professionals in their roles. And yeah, I don't think you can trust a mental health professional. I mean, there are many that you can trust, but I don't think as a whole you can trust them to the point where you just go into any clinic and offer up your children. You need to know, the background. And I personally, unless I really, really know and respect a clinician, I'm not leaving the room when they talk to my kid.
Yeah, I think that's kind of key, is don't just because they say so doesn't mean, you're still the parent, you're still in charge, you're still the one who's responsible for your child. I would never let, like you said, I would still probably even just go, I need to monitor this regardless, just for my own peace of mind for my child.
Yeah. And particularly if sexual identity is the topic, right? There could be other topics where it's fine, but
yeah. Well, and it's not, so we've seen, the government will pretty much fund whatever they believe is in their best interest, not in the interest of protecting the people, in my opinion, in any way. And as an example of that, I don't know how familiar you are with like the Tuskegee experiments. Mm-hmm. I mean, they literally gave a Black community syphilis on purpose and monitored them for like 50 years. Mm-hmm. So until they had to admit it, until they had to shut the program down. I mean, insane.
Well, there's two parts in addition to that. And one of those is that they only treated half of them. Half of them were given syphilis and they were in the control group. And so but then they watched how all the symptoms played out. And even after they were ordered to shut it down, because they were still following some of them longitudinally, they still just didn't tell those people that what they had done, and they still monitored them in exactly the same way, like nothing had happened. And that's another reason why we have had the Belmont report and all of that. That was a big study that led to that, federal guideline, and not guidelines, but federal mandates on how you can perform research.
Yeah. Well, it's just, it's, I don't know. I mean, you think about America and freedom, and, we're so busy being entertained and living our lives and, having a good time. And in the background, there's stuff like this going on. And I can only imagine now with the amount of data, real-time data that's available. Yeah, maybe they don't have to do actual physical experiments on people like with drugs, with LSD, sodium pentothal, things like that. I mean, I think it's going to be pretty scary when in the future we see a disclosure of some type or some type of church, church committee hearing that is talking about how much social control has been inflicted. Because I think COVID was probably just a small test run of whatever, but how much social control has been inflicted through the media, through social media, through the TV, through, advertising, and just the current bombardment that we face every day now.
Yeah. And when I was finishing up my PhD and looking at jobs, and the intelligence community looked like a place that, I looked into that, and they hire social psychologists with PhDs in experimental social psychology. And I remember I turned to my wife, Tiffany, and I looked at her and I said, I know what I'm capable of, like what skills I have as a social psychologist. And I can't imagine what awful things I would have to do with that if I was in the intelligence community. And then, of course, maybe it was in it was probably around 2007, 2008 is when it came out what they were having social psychologists do for interrogations in Iraq. Basically your job is to find the weaknesses and the ways to persuade them, and then to let the torturers go in and do the torturing. And so there was a very big kind of uproar in the field over, how can any of us do something like that?
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're coming up on an hour, and I know you got your professor at UCO.
I am. I'm gonna have to go start teaching my classes in a minute.
Yeah. What do you see just real quick? So I know you've taught at higher level students, but you're teaching some general classes now, and we kind of touched on it with my son going to UCO. But what do you see like with these kids that are coming in? Are they equipped for college, or are they like the kids from 20 years ago? I mean, are we seeing education go this way? What do you see?
They're very different, but they're very similar. Okay, so I think that because of a lot of the experiences that they've had in high school, where maybe they're not having to be held accountable, that was always an issue that we had, but it's more so than I've ever seen. But what I have seen is that they do still respond to my, I guess maybe firm style. I don't know.
Yeah, you're probably much more rigid than a regular professor, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be academically rigorous. We're going to move at a fast pace. I'll try to drag you along as best I can, but at the end of the day, you've got to put the work in. And if you don't, we start separating as the semester goes on, and maybe some people have earned more leeway than others on different things, kind of a meritocracy, the way that I look at it. We're not all treated exactly the same, but, you kind of earn what you get. And they responded well to that. I mean, it was a shock to a lot of them in the beginning because they haven't been held accountable in that way. But they've responded well, which has given me hope now as we get to the end of the semester. I'm like, okay, they just need more people like the people they're going to encounter as they advance into the higher levels of their education, as far as their junior year, senior year. Like, they need more of those good professors that we have doing that. And it's just going to be, they've got to catch up, but they can adjust. So I think they'll be okay.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear.
They're not coming in at the same starting point, though.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear from someone like you that's literally run the gambit, across the board, from, what you do with your company to, giving presentations at the higher levels, and then actually teaching general psychology to freshmen, in one way or another. I mean, it's,
Yeah,
I think
I've taught from freshmen to graduate students, and I've done it for 25 years. So I've got a pretty good feel for, how they come to us, and there's still some hope, but they're a little beat up. They didn't get the same experience that other kids have had.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, Doc. Plug all your stuff. So you've got the My Patriot Brain podcast on Spotify and everywhere else. You're on what, Truth Social? Just run through everything.
Yeah, so my website is the best place to get more information about me and all the different things I do, and that's theconservativesocialpsychologist.com. But it's got links.
Is this the same one here?
That's the one.
Okay.
That logo on the right is a link to my I think the Spotify version of my podcast, My Patriot Brain. I do it about every 2 weeks. Usually I talk about a research topic and have some political commentary in advance of that. And yeah, I've got a Rumble channel. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got my True Social account where I post things on. I've got the locals, My Patriot Brain community. I've got a book. If you scroll down a little bit farther, the book is probably, I guess, one of the bigger things. Keep going. And then, so the implicit biases in the unconscious, liberal biases, racial prejudice, and politics. That's the 4th book that I've written, but that's the one that's the most accessible to people now. Published in 2021, I think.
Yeah. Well, awesome, Doc. Thank you. And I think it's pretty wild to think that, I don't want to say wild, maybe naive to think that these things haven't gone on to the level that they have. And this is just what's been actually exposed or uncovered in one way or another. There could be things, I'm not going to say there is, but there could be things 10 times worse. Some program that was, completely destroyed. And we know, just hit real quick before we close out, just a couple of the keynote people that came out of like the MK Ultra.
Well, I'm not sure if you mean the key players we talked about or not, but I do want to mention Ted Kaczynski. So
no, that's who I'm talking about. There are people that caused major damage to society, like Kaczynski, who was a product of that.
Yeah, so Henry Murray is a famous psychologist at Harvard, and he did some experiments that were funded by the government on interrogation and what people could withstand. And so Ted Kaczynski, who was the Unabomber, was in that study as a participant. And people don't like to talk about this either. And I didn't know this as a psychologist. I think I found this out just through the rabbit hole I went down looking into this stuff. And these pieces aren't put together either. Like, I'm the only one that kind of put all of this stuff together. But yeah, so Ted Kaczynski was a participant in Henry Murray's studies at Harvard. It was a 4-year study where he would come in, I think, once or twice a year, and they would try to psychologically break him down. And they did this to all the participants. And he's just a regular college kid, and they would, bring him into a room for several hours and just berate him and try to find his weak spots, make note of that, and then try to do it again. And so they tried to break him down for 4 years, and he ended up being the Unabomber. And people really don't like to talk about the fact that he went through that 4 years of psychological torture by Henry Murray when he was at Harvard, and then he became the Unabomber. I mean, it just doesn't seem like that those are too far away as far as the connection goes.
Yeah. Now, do you not that you know all the detail of that, but did he volunteer to do that, or was he kind of recruited? Like,
that would have been a volunteer scenario where he signed up for it and maybe got a little bit of money or compensation for it. That was a very that one wasn't a hidden study. It was something that they probably volunteered for.
Yeah. Well, don't put anything beside the government to do. That's for sure, in one way or another. Well, I can't thank you enough. And like you said, you're literally probably the only person in your field that has kind of put all this together with the MK Ultra and a lot of these documents like that.
Yeah. And again, a lot of times I'll talk about the biases of our field, but this one I don't think has anything to do with bias. It has to do with the fact that this information has just not been in our field. It got hidden 40 years ago, and now you're really only dealing with people that have never heard of it. So I think that there will be more when I bring this to light to my colleagues, a lot more. And I don't think anybody's averse to studying it. They just don't know about it.
Yeah. Well, and you say hidden, but probably a lot of it was just destroyed in, one way or another, completely erased. So there would be no trace.
Yeah.
That's my speculation, but I mean, it's pretty common sense, I think, that if they
Oh, yeah.
tried to do it with MK Ultra and that just happened to have some documents that didn't get destroyed, there was probably a lot of programs like that.
Well, another thing that was interesting to me was my article, Psychology. It's the only article I've ever written where Psychology Today has changed the links on, because I'll make links to different things, and it kept disappearing. And I realized they were probably getting pressure from the government. Like, okay,
Yeah.
we're not going to take it down. I'm speculating, because it kept changing. I'm speculating that the government probably came in and said, "Can you take this down?" And they said, "No, we won't take it down, but we'll change the link and make it harder for people to find, but it's still going to be there."
Yeah. All right, sir. Well, I know you got to run. You got to teach our youth the good, give them good critical thinking skills and not be so one-sided, one way or the other, either way. I'm not going to say we're 100% right and the left is 100% wrong. There's a good middle ground there. But you're the man, in my opinion, to be out there teaching these kids.
Well, I appreciate it. And it was great talking to you as always. And I miss Jenny. I hope she comes back.
Yeah, we miss Jenny. All right, sir. Well, we'll let you go. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. All right. Well, there we have it. Another government run something against the people for government and intelligence in one way or another. Yeah, when I first listened to Dr. Mather's podcast last year about that, I was just and I would encourage anyone, just go on Spotify. You can look up his My Patriot Brain podcast, and let me get it back on the screen here. And I'm not sure what number. I can tell you real quick. Just a second. I'll tell you real quick what podcast number that was, so you can go right to it, because it is worth the listen. I think it's number 62. It's his podcast number 62, My Patriot Brain, and he goes into a little deeper dive in that podcast with some more information, and the part about MK Ultra programs I'd say it's probably about 25, 30 minutes long. Fantastic podcast. And he did an earlier podcast for the Unabomber. I think that was maybe podcast 43, I think, off the top of my head. But anyway, Dr. Mather, he's a true patriot, like he says in his podcast. And I'm just so glad there are guys like him out there, because you look at academia in general, and academia is just so one-sided. I mean, it's completely to the left. It's been hijacked in one way or another, and maybe not 100%, but there are good people out there. There are good teachers out there. We know there's good out there, but it's pretty one-sided in one way or another. But I'm glad he's out there fighting the fight for us and uncovering the things and validating and showing that these things did happen. The government did perform these. They did fund in one way or another, whether it was the government directly or through their intelligence agencies like the CIA. They did fund these programs in one way or another. So it's not that I hate that it happens. I just hate the fact that we don't know about it. It should be transparency. It's our money. It's our government. We should know that these kind of things are going on, and let us, with our ethical culture, decide whether that's, we should be doing something like that or not. But anyway, that's it for me today. And we're gonna probably, hopefully, have Jenny back on. And I have a surprise. I have a big surprise for Jenny when we come on. I was gonna do it today, but she's not on. I need to see her actual reaction. So I didn't want to do it today, because I need to see her live reaction on the show. And we need to make sure that Sandra Trawick is tuning in at the start of the Friday podcast. We're going to have Richard Labarth on. Richard Labarth is a local attorney. He is a patriot attorney. He's a conservative guy, very, very intelligent. He was one of the head lawyers for us when we had to sue the school district in Edmond over the discrimination of our kids during the COVID policies. He also represented Kylie McLaughlin down at OU, the volleyball player who had to sue the school for their DEI practices, forcing her into DEI. And ultimately, I think they took her scholarship away. She had to transfer out to another school. He was highly involved in that lawsuit and that settlement there with her. We're going to talk also with Richard. He's pretty political guy. He's kind of connected through the political realms of Oklahoma. And we're going to talk about the entrenchment, kind of the swamp in Oklahoma from things like the Turnpike Authority that Whitney's hit on multiple times. So anyway, we're going to talk about that entrenchment factor also, just from what he sees and legally and things like that. So anyway, we're going to have a fantastic podcast. Jenny will be back with us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for the comments and the likes and the thumbs up. We really appreciate it. We are we are the news in Oklahoma that no one else is telling. So we're proud to do that. We're proud to bring that to you guys. And just want to say thanks for tuning in and staying on here with us. And we'll see you Friday.